Hello, and welcome to this Laker lesson, part of our Research into Action series. I'm Vanessa Kiesler. I'm an education research consultant working with the Grand Valley State University Charter Schools office to bring you these research into actions. And today we're talking about staffing and schools. Before I get into the topic, I wanted to just remind us of a few things about research. You hear people talk all the time about research. We're going to use the research. We're going to be evidence-based. But there's a couple things to keep in mind. Research does vary in quality. Not all research is done in a way that uses appropriate methods or draws appropriate conclusions. And a lot of research only shows associations. It shows how things are related, but it doesn't actually show cause and effect. And that's okay. You don't always have to show cause and effect, but you want to be clear when you're saying, if we do something we know or we think it causes something else, that the study's been set up in a way to do that. And the final thing to keep in mind about research is that it is science, and so it is always evolving. I might tell you something today that the research has shown, and then as people keep studying it, we might learn something more. So things do change over time. I say all of this because that's why we make these Research into Action series, so that you can get high quality research on topics that matter to you, but you don't have to spend the time figuring out if this research is good or if it shows causal relationships or all of that. You can just get the information you need to help you as a practitioner make decisions and support your students. And always I want to remind you that the Grand Valley Charter Schools office does engage in its own research and makes it available to you. And you can find that at gvsu.edu/CSO/research. So today, here's what we're going to be talking about. Here's what you're going to learn. We're going to talk about some staffing strategies that can help you recruit and hire staff for your school. We're going to look at what the research says about structural supports that can help promote teacher well-being and get into a couple ideas for creatively staffing your schools. At a big picture level, this presentation started as a staffing presentation, really thinking about how do you hire and place and put people where they need to be. But as I worked through the research, I was reminded of a really important fact about staffing, that recruitment and hiring and placement are only part of the picture. You need to be engaged in retention of staff too. Continuing to hire and find new staff is more expensive and more challenging than finding the right staff and keeping them at your school. So part of this presentation is going to reference staff retention strategies as well. And just as a school leader or a practitioner, keep in mind that you have to be thinking about both sides of that coin as you support your staff. So what do we know about staffing schools? So focusing first on hiring, teacher hiring. Here are 3 research-based practices that help a lot with getting high quality candidates and getting them hired and in place in time for the school year. They are early hiring, which is starting and finishing hiring processes in the spring and early summer before school starts. Open hiring enables school hiring teams to select from all available candidates for a position. Now, because many of you are in charter school environments where you have more flexibility in your staffing, this piece of what the research says might be something you're already doing. That's kind of a good practice. But in traditional districts, sometimes that are not all positions are open to all staff. This has been a finding that the research has brought forward that is an impediment to getting people into the right positions. And then having a robust hiring process. So designing a comprehensive hiring process that both provides applicants with information about each position and then gives the hiring teams that really important information about candidates. You can see at the bottom of this slide, there's a citation. What do we know about teacher hiring? For this presentation, I use this piece of research a lot. And the reason I use this piece of research is because it's actually what's known as a meta-analysis, meaning they went through all of the evidence base, all of the good, high-quality causal research, and they synthesized it in a meta-analysis. So I actually rely on this piece a great deal for this presentation. But if you were to go to this piece, you could also look up all of the research that fed into these conclusions. I want to unpack each of those research-based practices a little bit more. So let's talk about early hiring first. What does engaging in early hiring do for you? It helps increase student learning. So this is all from the evidence. People found that when districts were using early hiring practices, they were able to increase student learning, increase teacher diversity, and increase teacher retention rates. So how can you do it? The first I already alluded to on the previous slide. You need to move up your hiring timelines into the spring and early summer as opposed to summer and into fall. You streamline your application process and candidate management, and you collaborate with the finance team or other parts of your office. Something researchers have found is that the central offices or the places that are doing the hiring, sometimes the school or the person trying to hire actually hasn't talked to the budget people or hasn't talked to HR or hasn't talked to some other components of the management of the school or the district. And so then the hiring and the recruitment is separate or divorced from the actual processes. So you need that collaboration to know who you're hiring and how you're going to fit them into the district processes. Open hiring. So research has shown that open hiring policies benefit both teachers and students. So there's a good reason, good evidence to engage in them for both teachers and students. And teachers really valued the open hiring policy. So again, open hiring is where anybody can apply for any position. There's not some that are limited for new candidates or internal candidates. Open hiring also helped a district like Boston, specifically, to move their hiring timeline up by nearly 2 months. And research has found that the combination of early hiring and open hiring increases teacher effectiveness and student achievement, improves teacher retention, and improves teacher diversity. Let's talk a little bit more about the screening and selection that's part of that robust hiring process. Research has found that hiring committees do not do a good job of identifying the most promising candidates because the process usually doesn't give them enough information. And research has also found that hiring processes often don't give prospective candidates enough information, which then either limits their understanding of the expectations of working in that school. It makes it harder for them to make a decision about if this was a good fit for them. So what is a robust hiring process? There's 4 key components. One is to determine the selection criteria ahead of time. What do we need this teacher to do? Engage in a robust initial screening of paper materials. And the research has a number of suggestions on this, but some pieces that you can include in the initial screening are prior evidence of effectiveness, both traditional and non-traditional screening metrics. So you may want to ask for information on involvement in other types of activities, like with the school, or how you support student leaders, or things like that. Years of teaching experience, and sometimes looking at information on the teacher prep program is helpful. The research is mixed on that. There's limited evidence on exactly how a teacher preparation program does or does not prepare a teacher, or how to directly tie, remember that cause and effect. It's hard to say this causes this in a teacher's outcomes. But what has been found is that if you understand about how the candidate was prepared, you understand better if they're a good fit for how your school is operating. So for example, if your school really uses MTSS, multi-tiered system of supports, and the candidate was prepared without any knowledge of that, they still might be a really good candidate, but you know that they're going to need extra scaffolding to be an effective part of your team. The third part of a robust hiring process is robust and detailed interviews. But interestingly, interviews alone are very unreliable measures of teacher effectiveness. So I know a lot of processes for hiring teachers, and not just teachers, hiring a lot of people is, you send a resume, you do an interview, and then you get hired, or you don't get hired. But interviews are not as effective as we think they are in figuring out who's going to be good for the job. But they are part of a robust hiring process. And then finally, specific and relevant demonstration lessons. So asking the teachers to prepare lessons and deliver them for the interview committee. Okay, so like I said, the other side of this picture is teacher retention and satisfaction. So you've implemented your robust hiring, you've done early hiring, you get all your hiring done by late spring, and now you have this great group of teachers. So what do we know about retaining them and focusing on their satisfaction? And this is a really big area, and that's not necessarily the full focus of this research into action. So I'm going to highlight a couple things and then point you at another resource that you might want to go back and watch. So there was actually a study done in Michigan in 2021 on teacher retention. So improving teacher retention helps with instructional effectiveness, and it reduces costs. It's very expensive to onboard new teachers. So there's both a student outcome reason and a budget bottom line reason to retain your staff. In this 2021 study in Michigan, the researchers found that retention rates ranged from 33 to 100% between 2013 and 14 and 2018 and 19 in Michigan. So it's a big range of where retention rates fall. And they found that the likelihood of retention was higher in agencies that had, and this is a long laundry list, but it will sound familiar when you read it, that had regular communication between new teachers and school leaders, that implemented mentoring programs, provided new teachers with an orientation to their school, allowed teachers to set goals in their evaluations, and provided teachers with sufficient instructional resources. So what I think is important about that list is all of these things are things that schools can theoretically do. These are malleable factors, if you will. You can have good communication between your school leader and new teachers. You can implement a mentoring program. You can have the teachers setting goals in their evaluations. And the last one might be constrained by resources, but you can focus on trying to make sure that teachers have sufficient instructional resources. I think sometimes this idea of retaining staff can feel like something that, how are we going to do it? How do we overcome? It's a hard job. What do we do? But the evidence is suggesting that some of the practices that help staff want to be retained are things that are in the control of schools and school leaders. And this was borne out by the most recent GVSU study, the school operations survey that was done in 2022, fall of 2022, where GVSU charter school office asked teachers in their portfolio about their perception of school working conditions. And we found that 82% of teachers were satisfied with being a teacher in their school, and 55% of schools in the GVSU charter network have favorable working conditions. And when the team that did the survey dug into that favorable working conditions piece, they found that teachers wanted strong professional connections that helped with their overall satisfactions. And they found that having good relationships between parents and guardians established by the school also influences teacher satisfaction. So again, these are things that schools can work on. How are we connecting with our teachers? How are we empowering them as professionals? And how are we creating good connections between the school and the parent and guardian? And there was another research into action that focused on school climate and retention that you may want to watch that goes into this topic in greater depth. So as I like to do in these research into actions, I also want to talk a little bit about Michigan specifically. So you are lucky, I think, in that you teach, you work, you are a school leader in Michigan, and you have access to the Michigan Department of Education, which has actually a very robust set of supports for school leaders and educators from the Office of Educator Excellence. So one of these things, the MDE hosts education workforce job fairs. Schools can register for a virtual booth, and I included the link there where you can do that. They come up in late May and into early June, so school leaders should take advantage of that as a way to recruit candidates. Michigan also has the Future Proud Michigan Educator campaign, which actually targets 4 different types of people: individuals who are working in PK-12 schools, career changers, educators transferring licensure from other states, and students in grades 6 through 12. And I wanted to talk specifically about individuals working in PK-12 schools. So these are people like subs, parapros, staff, or even teachers within the schools who want additional certifications. Michigan has a number of supports, often called Grow Your Own programs or other types of supports that allow districts and schools to find those staff who are working in their schools and help them get their appropriate certification so they can be part of the teaching staff. And if you're like, oh, I didn't know that, you should call the Grand Valley Charter School office or the Michigan Department of Education Office of Educator Excellence. Both of them can give you lots more information on how these work. And this is a really the Grow Your Own, the idea of finding people who are already connected with the school environment, who want to work there and are part of the community. This is a strongly research-supported activity, which is why MDE has pursued it and why the state legislature has invested in it. So be thinking about how you can grow your own staff and find people from the community or from your school community who can be part of your team. There are a couple efforts to they call them Welcome Back and Welcome Home Proud Michigan Educator. So if educators with expired certificates or with valid teaching certificates who aren't currently teaching. And again, this is a statewide effort to help find people who were teachers or who have certs that are expired. But if you know of somebody who's in that situation, know that the state has created pathways for those people to more easily get back into the teaching workforce. And as always, we like to wrap up with a couple practical ideas. So if you watch this research into action and you said, you know, I think there's some things we can do here, what should we do next? Here's what I would recommend. Sit down and review your hiring processes and timelines. When do you start posting? You know, when do you know about job openings? When do you start posting? Could you move that up? Could you do it any sooner? Again, know that early hiring is an important strategy for having a fully staffed team by the start of school and has positive outcomes for student achievement, teacher diversity, and teacher retention. Sign up for the MDE's virtual job fair. Like I said, review MDE's offering to see if any can help you with your recruitment. It depends on your needs. That's why step one, where you think about your hiring process, you think about your staffing needs, matters a lot, because maybe you don't need help with certain types of staffing, but take an assessment of yourself first. And then, as I already mentioned, you should always be reviewing your supports to say, are we creating an environment, working conditions that make people want to stay here? And you might want to reference that research into action, school climate and staff retention for more ideas.